Hello everyone, so I will be doing my January wrap-up. So for the month of January, I read 5 books, which I'm proud of because I usually read like 3 books. So let's get started. So the first book I read was Dumplin by Julie Murphy. I did a whole separate video talking about this book, but basically I gave it a 3-star rating. I thought it had a good message about body positivity, but I felt the movie on Netflix did a much better job. If romance and boy drama is not your thing, then I suggest not reading this book. That is what I loved about the movie. The romance was the least important thing about it, while in the book, romance and boy drama was the most important thing, which I hated. The second book I read was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is a mystery thriller novel about Adam Bishop, who wakes up each day in a different body. The point of this is to find out who killed Evelyn Hardcastle. And so each day he wakes up as a different host at the party where she died, and some guests are more helpful than others in solving this mystery. I gave this a 4-star rating on Goodreads. I very much enjoyed it. I thought it was very unique. In the beginning, it took me a while to get into it. It was a bit confusing at first since they haven't really explained anything that's going on. In the beginning of the book, the narrator wakes up in the woods and he doesn't know who he is or where he is. And he comes across this house, and when he goes in there, they explain that he is Sebastian Bell, and we begin to follow the life of Sebastian Bell. And then all of a sudden Sebastian faints, and then he wakes up in a different room, and he goes downstairs and he sees Sebastian Bell. He sees himself from the previous day when he comes in from the woods, not knowing who he was. And this freaks him out, and then he realizes he's an entirely different person. This guy in a plague doctor's mask comes in and tells him what is going on. He explains that he will relive the same day over and over again as different guests at this party. And the goal is to find clues to who killed Evelyn Hardcastle. And when he does find those clues, he needs to report to the plague doctor. And I thought that was so fascinating. So it does start off a little bit slow. It is a little bit confusing until you get a handle about who these characters are and what exactly is going on, since you do see the same day over and over again from different perspectives. I thought this was such an interesting way to solve a murder. Each time from each guest you get different clues to try to piece in together everything. I didn't see the ending coming, which I love. It means that the author did a fantastic job. And I also like that there's kind of sci-fi mixed into it, since he gets to jump from different bodies and relive the same day. This isn't a perfect book because I was left with some questions that were unanswered. I won't go into the questions because they will be spoilers, and I think this book you shouldn't go in being spoiled. The questions that I was left with weren't exactly plot holes. It's just this author set up this unique world that I thought was so interesting, and so I wanted to know more about it. And I wanted to go in more details because I had so many questions, and that's where I was left hanging. Other than that, I thought it was great, and I highly recommend this book. The third book I read was Catwoman Soulstealer by Sarah J. Maas. This is the third book in the DC Comics series. This is a young adult fantasy novel. This is about young Selena Kyle, who at the age of 17 is recruited into the League of Assassins. And 2 years later, she comes back to Gotham City, where she was born and raised, as this socialite Holly Vanderhees. But during the night, she prowls around as Catwoman to steal from the rich. And she soon teams up with Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn to wreak havoc. I gave this a 3-star rating. There are parts of the book that I really enjoyed, but a lot of parts that I didn't enjoy. I think if this book wasn't about superheroes that I know and liked, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed this book as much, and I still didn't really enjoy it. I really enjoyed the trio of Catwoman, Poison Ivy, and Harley Quinn. I just wish there was more of it. In this book, we meet Batwing, who is Batman's apprentice, and Batman isn't there. He's off on a mission, and so Batwing is there to protect the city. And this next part, I guess, is kind of spoilery, but it explains why I didn't enjoy this book as much. I wanted a more cat and mouse kind of dynamic. I wanted 3 badass villains, but I really didn't get that. They turned out not being really as bad of a villains, and at one point Batwing teams up with them. Plus, I thought the romance was so stupid. I just wish this book was more mature. That way it could be more murdery and villainy, which I think this book needed more of. They have 3 awesome women characters, and I don't think they were used properly. The 4th book I read was A Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule. This is a true crime novel about the serial killer Ted Bundy. I read this for the Peter Mon Book Club, and for this year we're reading all true crime books each month, which I love. I'm going to do a whole separate video about this book because that's something I wanted to do on my channel, was read true crime novels and then report back with all the details of the murder, report up all about the murder, the serial killer's or the true crime's life, and then go into the book details. So I won't go in too much detail in this wrap-up, but Ted Bundy was a serial killer in the 70s, and the author Anne Rule has a unique perspective because she was friends with him. They worked together on a suicide hotline. I gave this a 4-star rating. I thought this book was so fascinating and well written. At first, I was upset because Anne was describing Ted in a nice way. She said that not only did he take lives, but he also saved them because she saw that firsthand. So I thought she was kind of biased, and I thought that was being insensitive to the victims and the victims' family. But the more I read it, the more I thought that she brought a perspective that no one else had. We got to see a different side of Ted that we probably wouldn't have seen before because he's a serial killer and everyone hates him, pretty much. But it was interesting to see what made him so charismatic and what people thought of him before they knew he was a serial killer. There is one part of the book that really stuck with me. I was discussing this with everybody I know. It was that they described Ted as being so smart. And during this one scene, he was in a park trying to get his next victim. And there were a lot of people around witnessing this. And so when he was talking to his next victim, people around saw this, but he was, being very charismatic, so they didn't even think anything wrong. And she asked her name, and everyone heard him say Ted. And so after this person went missing and they realized that they saw the serial killer and they have his name, so a sketch went out to everyone saying this is what he looks like, and he goes by the name Ted. So a lot of people saw this sketch and thought, oh, this looks like Ted Bundy, and saw the name Ted, and so they called the police, including Anne herself, to report this. And they specifically said that other than the sketch and the name being Ted, there is no other reason to suspect that he's a serial killer. That made me really think that if Ted gave a different name, and so they saw the sketch and it said Bob or something, they probably wouldn't even piece it together and say, oh, that looks like Ted because of the name, because it was a different name, and they probably wouldn't have called. And Ted probably wouldn't have been on their radar yet. So I thought that was his first big mistake. The one thing that I really have respect for Anne Rule is that she said, it is impossible to tell each victim's story with the confines of one book. All those bright, pretty, beloved young women became Bundy's victims, and only Ted stayed in the spotlight. I think this is so true. Ted is the only one who is remembered. After 30 years, we are still talking about him because they just had that series on Netflix, and there's going to be a new movie with Zac Efron. I think it's so sad that we only know them as his victims, that we know the moments leading up to their death and what he did to them, but we really don't know them outside of being Ted's victims, which I think is so sad because it's reported on Ted's childhood, Ted's life before he became a serial killer and all the way leading up to his execution. So we know so many things about Ted, but his victims are unremembered. I really appreciate that she put that in there, so she knows that it is heartbreaking that only serial killers are being remembered. And the last book I read for the month of January was The Amateurs by Sarah Shepard. So this is a young adult mystery novel about Erin Kelly, who about 5 years ago, her 17-year-old sister went missing and never seen again. And so 5 years later, she posts on this website called Case Not Closed, asking for people's help. Seneca, Maddie, and Brett see this and they're fascinated with this case, and so they come to help. But at first, Erin isn't very receptive because they are all the same age as her. I gave this a 3-star rating, but I really enjoyed it. I finished this book in like 2 days. I gave it only a 3-star rating because I only enjoyed it because of the entertainment perspective. I was very entertained throughout this book, but I can admit that it isn't a really, perfect book or, a great work of art. This is written by the same person as Pretty Little Liars, so if you are a fan of that book series or even the show, then you might like this book. The only thing that I thought was a little off and weird is the need for the author to let us know that the characters are diverse. So in the beginning, how she introduced how Seneca was half black was good. I thought it was a good way to let us know the ethnic background of Seneca, but then it kept being brought up. And at one point, this one character who didn't even know Seneca just saw her once from afar, talked to another character and was like, oh, who was that half black girl? And I thought that was a little weird because I was like, how does she even know that she is half black? I thought that was just thrown in there for us to remember, hey, look, my characters are diverse. I thought this book was predictable at first, but then at the very, very end, it just threw me off. I did not expect that at all, especially reading this. I was like, oh, this is very predictable. And I think the author did that on purpose just to give us a little twist at the end, which I really enjoyed because like I said, I was going in there going like, oh, this is so predictable, but I enjoy it so much. If you just want to read a book that you want to have fun with and not have to really think about, then this book is for you. But if you are a more serious reader, then this book isn't probably for you because, like I said, it is very enjoyable, but that's probably about it. Those are all the books I read in the month of January. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye!